Ralph Towner, who passed away on January 18, 2026, at the age of 85, was more than a guitarist. He was a sonic cartographer, charting landscapes of sound that bridge jazz, classical, folk, and world music. Few musicians of the 20th century could claim the subtlety, discipline, and imagination that Towner brought to every performance. Revered for his mastery of the 12-string guitar, the classical guitar, and piano, he became a lodestar for generations of musicians seeking beauty beyond convention. By the end of his life, his creative output had amassed him a net worth estimated at $5 million. It was modest by celebrity standards, reflecting a life devoted less to wealth than to art, touring, and recording, particularly with ECM Records and the groundbreaking Ensemble organ. For Towner, financial success was a byproduct of integrity. The real treasure was the music itself. Early life. Born on March 1, 1940, in Chehalis, Washington, Ralph Towner entered a household where music was more than a pastime. It was oxygen. His mother, a piano teacher and church organist, filled the rooms with classical melodies, hymns, and improvisations. His father, a trumpet player, encouraged Ralph and his siblings to explore brass instruments and to feel rhythm in their bones. Music in the Towner household wasn't compartmentalized. It was a way of living. Ralph was a prodigy of curiosity. By age 3, he was improvising on the piano with astonishing fluency. By 5, he was learning trumpet, joining local youth bands, and performing in polka dances and swing ensembles. His early life was punctuated by local performances, but it was also marked by self-discipline. He would often retreat to corners of his home to practice, inventing exercises and challenges for himself that no teacher had assigned. Towner's formal education began at the University of Oregon, where he initially pursued art. But music, as it often does with the gifted, called louder. Switching to a focus on composition, he studied under Homer Keller, absorbing the intricacies of counterpoint, orchestration, and harmony. It was during these years that he first encountered the classical guitar, an instrument whose expressive possibilities would eventually define his career. Not content with the confines of American instruction, Towner traveled to Vienna in the 1960s to study under Karl Scheidt at the Vienna Academy of Music. The European immersion expanded his palette, the architecture of sound, the nuance of phrasing, and the intimacy of solo performance all left indelible marks on his musical consciousness. Vienna gave him the vocabulary. America gave him the improvisational freedom to speak. Personal life. Ralph Towner was famously private. Unlike many of his contemporaries in jazz and rock, he shunned gossip columns, tabloids, and personal publicity. Public records provide no verified information about a spouse or children, and interviews suggest he lived largely for his music, traveling for months at a time with organ or performing solo. His closest confidants were often fellow musicians rather than romantic partners. Religion, if present, seemed more of a formative influence than a spiritual compass in adulthood. His mother's church organ shaped his early ear for structure and solemnity, but Towner's adult compositions suggest reverence for the mystery of sound itself rather than adherence to any faith. His other works extended far beyond performance. Towner wrote for films, contributed to stage productions, and composed orchestral works performed by major ensembles in Europe and America. He also taught masterclasses and mentored younger musicians, leaving an intellectual and artistic legacy that rivals his discography. Professional career. The early years. By the late 1960s, Towner had arrived in New York City, ready to carve his niche in a jazz scene dominated by electrified instruments and flamboyant showmanship. He brought something entirely different: acoustic purity, a disciplined technique steeped in classical training, and a philosophical approach to improvisation. Towner's first major affiliation was with Paul Winter's Consort, an ensemble exploring jazz fused with global and folk elements. Here, he began experimenting with timbre, texture, and the emotional possibilities of acoustic sound. His work stood out for its subtleties: a chord progression whispered, a single note suspended in silence. Oregon, a new frontier. In 1970, Towner, along with Paul McCandless, Glenn Moore, and Colin Walcott, formed Oregon. The quartet was groundbreaking. Jazz improvisation infused with classical structures, Indian tabla rhythms, and folk-inspired melodies. They played without amplification for much of their early work, challenging audiences to listen deeply, to feel every harmonic nuance. The music of Oregon was ambitious but intimate. Albums like Music of Another Present Era and Winter Light established the group as innovators. Even in a genre known for virtuosic solos and technical fireworks, Towner's contributions were distinct. He layered textures with finger-picked 12-string patterns, and his piano improvisations provided a harmonic foundation that seemed simultaneously rigorous and free. Solo career and ECM. Towner's solo career, launched in tandem with his work in Oregon, became one of the hallmarks of his legacy. His relationship with ECM Records began in 1973 with Trios/Solos, a collection that revealed his dual mastery of guitar and piano. The label, known for its meticulous sound engineering and aesthetic focus on spacious, contemplative recordings, proved a perfect fit. Diary 1974 remains one of his most celebrated solo works, showcasing layered overdubs that allowed Towner to accompany himself. Albums like Solstice and Blue Sun pushed boundaries further, blending folk, jazz, and classical sensibilities into compositions that were at once cerebral and deeply emotional. Collaborations were constant. Towner worked with Jan Garbarek, Gary Peacock, Jack DeJohnette, and other luminaries, creating dialogues across instruments and continents. His career was defined not just by his playing, but by his ability to compose landscapes of sound, where each note had purpose, each silence had weight, legacy, and influence. Even as he aged into his 80s, Towner remained active. Albums like My Foolish Heart 2017 and At First Light 2023 show a musician unafraid of quiet introspection. His influence is evident in generations of acoustic guitarists, improvisers, and composers. Ralph Towner's professional life demonstrates that musical innovation does not require spectacle. It requires listening, discipline, and patience. He taught audiences to slow down, to hear the spaces between notes, and to find poetry in restraint. House tour and car collection. Towner was private about his material life, and there is no public record of detailed information about his homes or vehicles. He spent his later years in Italy, residing in Palermo and later Rome, likely in modest homes that provided privacy and the space to compose. No interviews or verified sources detail car collections or luxury acquisitions. Towner seemed to measure wealth in musical output rather than material possessions. College career. Ralph Towner's formal education at the University of Oregon laid the foundation for his compositional sophistication. Initially enrolled as an art major, he switched to music and studied composition under Homer Keller. This grounding in counterpoint orchestration and harmony informed his ability to navigate jazz improvisation with a classical sensibility. Advanced studies in Vienna with Carl Skite sharpened his technical prowess on classical guitar, allowing him to integrate European classical tradition into modern jazz improvisation. This combination of American jazz freedom and European discipline became Towner's hallmark. He was a musician whose techniques served imagination rather than vanity. Cause of death. Ralph Towner died peacefully on January 18, 2026, in Rome, Italy. At 85, he had spent a lifetime immersed in sound, touring, recording, and composing. No official cause of death beyond natural causes related to age has been reported. The news of his passing was met with tributes from across the musical world, from jazz purists to classical aficionados, all recognizing the loss of an artist whose voice was uniquely contemplative yet profoundly expressive. Ralph Towner's life was a meditation on the possibilities of sound. From a small home in Chehalis, Washington, to concert halls across Europe, Asia, and America, he cultivated a voice that was subtle yet commanding, intimate yet expansive. His music invites patience, reflection, and deep listening, qualities that defined him as a person as much as an artist. Towner's genius lay not only in technical mastery, but in his ability to transform silence into dialogue, to shape sound into architecture, to make the guitar, piano, and his own imagination speak in ways that resonate across generations. In an age where virtuosity is often equated with spectacle, Towner reminded the world that depth and nuance create a lasting legacy. For fans, students, and musicians, Ralph Towner is a beacon, proof that curiosity, discipline, and devotion to one's art can transcend trends, genres, and time itself. His music remains, like the quiet architecture of a cathedral, an enduring space for exploration, reflection, and wonder.